cloudy, rainy, kind of chilly, overall pretty gloomy day here in London, and the weather is fitting. No, this has not become a weather forecast show, although depending on speech laws that might come up in the future, it might be. But the forecast, non-weather wise, is not very good either. The general election happened last night in the UK. The Labour Party won a large majority, not as large as some of the polls predicted, but large enough that they can do whatever they want. They won about two-thirds of the seats in Parliament with around one-third of the vote. Why and how that happened, we'll get to on the show. But yeah, for those of you not familiar with British politics, and most of the audience of the Ayn Rand Center UK is not UK based. Um, uh, what was my point about UK politics? Oh yeah, voting happens, results come in at night, and then that's it. You have a new prime minister. There's no transitional period of 3 months or 2.5 months or however long it is in the US. Um, so yeah, the results started coming in slightly before midnight. I think they're not even, I don't know if the last two seats have already been called. They weren't a couple of hours ago when I checked, but Keir Starmer is already the Prime Minister of the UK. Morgan, what are we in for in the next 5 years?
Well, I think we'll be in for a lot. I mean, just to give people a sense of the scale of this, so there's about 650 seats in the House of Commons, and the Labour Party's won 412, and that's a very rare victory. The only equivalent one in modern times I can think of is the Labour Party again in 1997. They've fallen just short of that. I think in 97 they won 417 or 418, something like that, but they're pretty close. And as you say, they've done it on a smaller share of the vote because of the quirks of how the votes are cast. So they have a very, very strong majority. If they were ever to lose a vote, it would be because of an internal rebellion by their own MPs, and it would have to be a big one. So really, they can comfortably pass a law if they want to, is basically the reality of this, and there's not much to stop them. Now, Keir Starmer's speech when he was entering number 10 Downing Street earlier was interesting. I mean, so what I was thinking coming up to this election is he sort of ran his campaign not appealing to the left, trying to appeal to the center ground. And in his speech, he said that there would be governance unburdened by doctrine, which again is, I guess, a kind of centrist kind of position. And he's, I guess, signaling that he's not going to be leaning to the left. I mean, let's see whether that's true. Because now he's in there, he has got a lot of leeway and a lot of strength to do that if he wants to, even though people would probably accuse him of being a hypocrite. So this probably is not going to be as damaging sort of on economic policy as it would be if this were Jeremy Corbyn who had this kind of majority. The interesting thing about this actually is that the share of the vote Labour got is similar to what Jeremy Corbyn got in 2019, although of course he lost quite convincingly. But I do feel still skeptical. I find it hard to believe the Labour Party with this much power isn't going to do a lot to change things. Perhaps it'll be more Blair-like in the sense of lots of change rather than Jeremy Corbyn-like in doing lots of strong socialist kind of change. Maybe he won't be doing lots of nationalisation, although he has promised a little bit of that. But we'll see. I still feel fairly uncertain about exactly what they're going to do. Part of their strategy when they were campaigning in communications wise is they were holding a lot of their specific policies back. They said they were going to do a couple of things, but they were very, very general on the detail. And some people are calling that a kind of Ming Vase strategy, just trying to not rock the boat. Because in effect, so long as they didn't screw things up and the Conservatives were just being the Conservatives, then they would win, which seems to be exactly what's happened. So I think a lot of people are still a bit unsure about what exactly Labour's going to do.
Yeah, definitely. This campaign for labor, was kind of like the debate for Trump in the sense that he had to not screw up and let Joe Biden have his senior moment, and the conservative party has had its senior moment for the past 14 years in government, and yeah, it would have been very difficult for them to actually win this election. I mean, and the thing about Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Akira asks, is New Labor 2.0 back, Razi? And this is directed at me mostly because of people like Morgan on this channel accuse me of being a Blairite and a Labor supporter or New Labor supporter, which I am not. The reason for it is because I keep pointing out that very many economic policies under the previous Labor government were to the right, if you want to call it that, although it's very problematic as a spectrum of the conservative government, whether it's income tax, whether it's value-added tax, the equivalent of a sales tax that you have in the U.S., whether it's business tax rates, which were recently hiked up a year or two ago by the conservatives from 18% to 24%, of massive hike. Whether it's all sorts of regulations, all sorts of things like a sugar tax, and things that are really interventions in our life and in our pockets. Um, Now, so the question, do I think this is Labor 2.0? No, because the conservatives can govern to the left of the previous Labor government, but the new Labor government cannot take the country to the right. And again, I use these terms very loosely because, yeah, for their audience, they need to move the country in the direction of socialism. I mean, Keir Starmer is certainly nowhere near as bad as Jeremy Corbyn, who he kicked out of the party, and by the way, who won his seat yesterday from the Labour Party because it was Labour under him, and now he's an independent, and he beat the Labour candidate, which is a whole maybe a whole topic for a whole show on its own. But he self-identifies as a socialist. His party is controlled by the unions, maybe to a lesser degree than in the past, but still, they are controlled by the big public sector unions. Those are very powerful organizations with no accountability whatsoever, pretty much. So yeah, there's that to remember. In terms of his hold on the party and how much he can do, I do think in some ways, at least when it comes to him versus his own parliamentary party, he has less to worry about than a conservative would, because just the Conservative Party has a history of just getting rid of its leaders. In these 14 years, they had, was it five prime ministers, including, was it five? Yeah, Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak. The last four of whom were in like the last, what, 5 or 6 years. Um, so yeah, I don't think that is a worry for him personally, but of course he can't. He might be better than the rest of his party, but his policies can't be that much better than the rest of his policies than the rest of his party.
Yes, I mean, just to put it in context, just how many conservative prime ministers we've had for the last 14 years. As you say, there's been five, and in the entire history of Britain, there's only been six Labour prime ministers ever. So, it's quite a lot we've gone through. Now, I mean, just I'll say something on Keir Starmer, but just to shine a light on the really interesting thing that's happened at this election as well, is the surge in kind of third parties or in other parties doing well. The Liberal Democrats have come from almost political extinction in recent years, where they had something like seven MPs from 2015 onwards to now having 71. And doing it in rather a strange way. Ed Davey is the leader of that party, and basically he decided he was going to campaign looking like a buffoon. He sort of bungee jumped. He fell off a water board, went down water slides, played drums on yoga balls with old people, and somehow. Well, actually, what I'll say about that, somehow that's worked. And yet, in a way, I think what's really gone on at this election is it hasn't been a Labour victory. There hasn't really been a Liberal Democrat victory. There's been a Conservative loss, and maybe I'll say why I think that is, but. So certainly the Liberal Democrats have done well. The Scottish nationalists have been decimated. Reform got a huge number of votes, but actually only managed to get 4 seats. I think they got about 4 million votes. So you can think about that as almost 1 million votes per seat. Again, that's due to the quirks of the system. And so that's the third party thing I think is a very important part of this. But for Keir Starmer, lots of very conservative people or commentators I've seen have been very worried about the kind of Tony Blair 2.0, because Blair was a kind of radical and kind of not. And if you actually listen to some of his speeches, he encouraged people to be radical. And what he was radical on was kind of securing change whilst being centrist on economic things, which, New Labour is modeled on the New Left in certain ways, and that's kind of a bit more like what the New Left is like. So they got managed to secure some kind of social radical change, some radical change on constitutional issues, and people like Alistair Heath in the Telegraph were warning that if Keir Starmer comes in, it's the end of the UK as we know it, because Keir Starmer is an enthusiast for international law and all this kind of stuff. I thought Alistair Heath was overblowing it just a little bit, but that's the kind of thing they're worried about. And I agree, Razi, that actually the New Labour years from the beginning were actually economically relatively healthy. The last time the UK actually had a surplus as opposed to a deficit was, I think, 2001 under Tony Blair, after which time they do start borrowing a lot of money. But actually, even the UK in debt in 2010 is actually nothing like it was now. And actually, we still haven't managed to eliminate the budget deficit, which Labour had managed to get us in 2010. So it's potentially not as bad as people are worried about, and perhaps maybe as a cure is worried about. But maybe, I don't know, shall I say why I think this was really just a Conservative loss rather than a Labour victory?
Sure.
So, as I mentioned before, Labour has secured at this election roughly the same amount of vote share as they actually got in 2019 when they lost really quite badly. And actually, looking at the Liberal Democrats, they haven't massively managed to increase their vote share either. And actually, the thing people have been saying about the Labour share of the vote is this is the lowest share of the vote to kind of an incoming government in history. And yet they managed to secure this massive majority. Well, certainly it's the lowest share of the vote for a long time. And so, really, what seems to have happened, especially if you go and look at some of the results from the individual constituencies, is that actually there's just been a huge number of people fleeing away from the Conservative Party and stealing away from their votes rather than an increase in votes for people like the Labour Party broadly. So looking at some other constituencies like Jacob Rees-Mogg. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, for people who don't know, is this kind of quite famous Conservative politician who has a seat for North East Somerset, which is quite a Conservative area. And yet he lost to the Labour Party. The Labour Party came first. I think he came second. And then third was something like the Reform Party. And the Reform total vote was actually bigger than the difference between Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Labour candidate. So in effect, those votes would have previously gone to him, and they've actually managed to suck them away and therefore push him down into second place, if that makes sense. And broadly, that seems to have been what has happened in a lot of seats. So there's just been all these third parties getting support and taking that away from the Conservatives. And then that's managed to push Labour into first place in a lot of these seats, as opposed to Labour really, really doing well. And it is a strange thing that the way the electoral system works, that given that that's the case, Labour can get this huge number of seats. And yet that's how it is, given that we have first past the post. So even though this is a huge victory in terms of seats, I think this is actually potentially quite a weak victory, and there's quite unstable. The kind of foundations under it aren't there. And in 5 years' time, in 2029, or whenever we next have a general election, we could then see a radical change again, but away from the Labour Party, especially if they start having scandals, if they start upsetting people, if the Conservatives manage to then sort of rebuild a bit of trust, then people will come back to them, probably away from the Liberal Democrats, maybe away from Reform, and maybe they'll rebuild some of their seat numbers. Maybe it wouldn't be enough such that they could win again. But I think this massive majority that Labour has is potentially actually quite weak. I don't know what you think, Razi.
Yeah, as the results started coming in yesterday, it was, I don't remember how many of the first seats, but quite a few. In all of them, Reform came second. And then as more and more seats came in, yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg was not the only MP who lost his seat because Reform got a lot more than the difference. I mean, former Prime Minister Liz Truss, who we defended on this channel when she was Prime Minister, and this was basically the only place she was defended. Yeah, she lost her seat, but if that Reform is not one of those parties, they pride themselves, and this has always bothered me about Nigel Farage, among other things, that he prides himself on being able to take votes from Labour because he's like working class or friendly to the working class. Whenever you see him, see any pictures or videos of him, he's in the pub having a pint. He's like the kind of. By the way, I wonder if that's as a side tangent, if that's why the Lib Dems did so well, because their leader, you mentioned, looked like a buffoon, and people say you want to vote for people like you, and maybe many people feel like buffoons and decided to vote Lib Dem although I think they may have been the least bad option of all of the different options. But yeah, yeah, I haven't done the math, but I am almost certain that if reform votes had all gone to the Tories, they would still be in power. Um, yeah, one interesting thing to see in the future is if reform and the conservatives remain two different parties, because that's not necessarily going to be the case, and it might be in their best electoral interest to unite, or at least have some sort of an agreement where they don't run against each other and then they form a coalition. But that there's 5 years for them to decide about that while they're sitting in the opposition benches. Thank you, Jeff, for the super chat. Jeff says, "My condolences. Canada hopefully will switch from left to further right again to rid us of uh,
Oh, Razi seems to be paused. Okay, everybody. Just while we wait for Razi to coming back, I thought that was me who was lagging, not Razi. I'll just say the other thing that I think has gone on here that's allowed Labour to win as big a majority as they have, which is the death of the SNP. Now, the Scottish National Party, when
oh,
Labour won the last time in 1997, was nowhere near as big as they were now. And in fact, Labour had a lot of those seats up in Scotland. Hey there, Rosie. I was just telling people about Scotland's role in all of this, which I can
you
keep
lose
going
me.
with if you
My
like.
Zoom shut down and then opened itself. But yeah, where
So,
were we? Um, yeah, do you want to continue? There's a few more super chats, but if you were in the middle of something, go ahead.
sure. So I was just saying the last time that the Labour won this big majority in 1997, they had managed to get a lot of seats in Scotland. And then with the growth of the Scottish National Party, they had taken almost every single seat in Scotland at one point, which is about 52, 53, I think. And actually, without that number, that was making it very difficult for Labour to get into power. And Labour, I think, is very lucky that the SNP has completely floundered in recent years. Not only have they done badly at managing things within Scotland on a devolved level, but their leader, Nicola Sturgeon, resigned and then resigned amongst lots of scandal, as she and her husband were both arrested and under investigation for basically financial fraud kind of thing related to their party. And then the guy who took over, Humza Yousaf, just imploded his government here in Scotland almost for no reason, just through poor decision making, really. And so people, even though they haven't changed their mind about Scottish independence, have kind of thrown up their hands and said that they've had enough. And that's allowed Labour to come back in and get this big majority.
Uh, there are problems with your audio, at least for me. Okay, my Zoom shut down. Your audio is bad. We are living under a Labour government. I don't know, by the way, if my when you guys lost me, but I'll read PC's super chat again just in case. PC said Galloway out, and that's good. Corbyn won. Akira, thank you for the super chat. Akira asks, how much would Margaret Thatcher last nowadays? I mean, to me, when I saw that Corbyn was a serious, viable candidate 9 years ago in the election, and yeah, he was running against Theresa May, but still an openly Marxist candidate, leaving aside the anti-Semitism, openly Marxist candidate less than 30 years after Thatcher with an actual shot at winning. I thought that says something in part about the practical case for capitalism and for free markets, and how that is insufficient, because the practical case was made in this country by Margaret Thatcher taking a country that was really had pretty much collapsed and fixing it for the most part. And yeah, we saw how that lasted as proof that capitalism is better than socialism. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, Morgan, rest assured, scandals will come.
I mean, almost certainly. I mean, just even just looking back at Tony Blair, there was scandal almost straight away with the F1 Bernie Ecclestone scandal and all this kind of thing. With to do with paying for kind of votes in the House of Commons, I think was what that scandal was to do with. Or oh no, it was to do with advertising, wasn't it? Advertising in F1. Um, so yeah, there will be. The thing is, can they manage to really impress people And can the Conservatives manage to win things back? Now, probably they won't win things back quite so convincingly that they would win it in 5 years' time. I wouldn't have thought. I would have to guess we were in for at least two terms of Labour government. People like Peter Hitchens, I saw, were warning of 20 years of Labour government. I think that's very, very unlikely. But probably I'd suspect this is Labour having won for at least two terms, I would have thought.
So Equal to Reality asks about his super chat. At what point did you guys lose me? I'm not sure when that happened, but I did read that out, but it could be that nobody heard.
I think you were reading a bit of it. Why don't you read it out again and we can see?
So that was the £17 76 pence super chat by Equal to Reality, who said, as we move into 1994, it is time for 1776. Did you hear me read that one out?
I'm not sure if you finished
Okay,
it.
then I was cut off for longer than I thought. Well, I'll also thank Wes Stewart. I'll also thank Jeff Bannister. Did you hear the Canada super chat?
I did, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that was all heard. Hopefully you've heard everything since I came back. And thank you, Alexis, for the super chat. Alexis says the censorship is already starting. You guys being silenced live. Uh, and yeah, I mean, well, we can talk about censorship at some point, although maybe we can't. But um, let's talk about Brexit. The Labour Party was not in favor of Brexit. I mean, well, the leader of the Labour Party, I think, was, but wouldn't say it. But the Conservative leader, by the way, was not in favor either. How much do you think of Brexit is going to be rolled back? So Keir Starmer has said he doesn't think there should be a second referendum. It's what's done is done, kind of. But I don't know if that's something that he could hold on to if the pressure mounts, if his economic policies that are supposed to fix the economic policies of the Tories fail somehow. I don't know what that will lead to. So yeah, do you think we're gonna see the UK become a member of the European Union at any time soon?
No, I don't think so. And for a couple of reasons. And I mean, it could happen and I could be taken by surprise, but I'm not convinced that it's likely. Partly because of what Labour has been saying. They've been saying, they accept the Brexit, you can't change it. That's where we are now. We just have to look to the future. And it would be, I think, a very controversial thing if they tried to do otherwise. I guess theoretically, maybe they could go for that in the next 5 years if they wanted to, but I would think that would be very, very difficult on numerous fronts. But also because the EU leaders don't seem to want to allow it. Obviously, it seems to have been a bit personal to them in lots of ways, and they kind of feel like, well, you've made your bed and lie in it. And I think I saw one of them being interviewed recently, and that was to some extent their sentiment, even just the sentiment of rejoining the single market, even if we weren't in the full political union. They seemed kind of very resentful, saying, no, you can't have your cake and eat it. You're gone, kind of thing. Maybe not all of them feel that way, but we would need them to allow us to come back in. So I don't think so. It could happen, but the only ones who are actually promising even rejoining the single market were the Liberal Democrats, I think, as far as I saw. So I think it's unlikely. And as you say, the main politicians in this election didn't want to bring Brexit up, and lots of people were commenting on that, because the 2019 election was all about Brexit. It was the getting Brexit done kind of election. And I think in this one, I think basically they didn't want to bring it up because it is so fractious and controversial. It's kind of behind us now. Let's not talk about it. I think that was why they didn't bring it up.
Yeah, Chris says we never got Brexit. We are still in the European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, I don't know if that. Yeah, we are, but we did get Brexit. Unfortunately, there were bad things about the European Union. There were good things about it, and we kept pretty much all the bad things and got rid of all the good things. To be clear, I think Brexit was a good idea. I just don't think it was done right. You can count on politicians to take something good and screw it up. Um, so I don't know. Bottom line, when I look at what's coming, first of all, for me, watching the election, and we're going to talk about this on the reality show, it was still enjoyable to see conservatives lose their seats. They deserve it. They don't deserve to be in government. So that's a good thing. And of course, there is no rational alternative. So we got an irrational alternative to irrational leadership, and I think we're gonna experience that. When it comes to Israel, I don't think Israel had enough support from the UK. I think it'll have less support, and that's putting it very mildly. I think the UK has been on the Palestinian side of this war, if not immediately after October 7th, then when Israel started responding. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to seeing Keir Starmer's policies again. He's not as bad as some on the left. Jeremy Corbyn, after leaving the Labour Party and running as an independent, uh, he tweeted yesterday, "Palestine is on the ballot today." He was an unofficial Hamas candidate and won, as did three other Hamas candidates in yesterday's election. That's something to be terrified of because it means that this is an issue important enough and important enough from the wrong side of it for enough people to actually win in four different constituencies. In a bunch of others, they did well. And yeah, so on foreign policy, on economic policy, on basically every policy imaginable, I think we can expect things to get worse, even though the conservatives, the bar was set very low by the conservatives over the past 14 years.
Yeah, I guess that's true. In a lot of ways, I still just feel like we have to sort of wait and see. But if I were to place a bet, I think you would be right. Certainly on Israel and Gaza, Starmer had been better than Corbyn, but then in a sense, that's saying not very much because Corbyn was just so awful. And I think we'll just have to see. I think Angela Rayner, I want to say she's just been made. Was she made the first female chancellor of the exchequer or something like that? I may have seen, or maybe it was she was made deputy prime minister. I'd have to go and double check because I only just saw that glancing beforehand. Angela Rayner was, I think we spoke about this, seen in her constituency, promising that if the Labour government came in, then there would be realized, support for a Palestinian state, something like that. So even though Starmer himself was making kind of better noises, which is basically just more hesitant noises around Israel and Gaza. I think certainly the party that's just come in with a big majority is very pro-Palestine broadly and very anti-Israel. And we can only imagine that the government policy will be shaped by that. And Keir Starmer is going to be under a lot of pressure from those people. So yeah, from an Israel perspective, we have to take this as presumably being quite bad.
PC, thank you for the super chat. PC says, Razi, I've had dinner in my old home with Corbyn. He is a fool. My mom knew him. Yeah, my condolences. Uh my what? Hang on. PC says sends another super chat and says was before Corbyn was what MP? Is that what you're trying to say? In any case, if you had dinner with Corbyn, congratulations in a sense for surviving that. PC, I believe you are of Jewish descent, right? So we won't tell so that Corbyn's fans aren't upset, or maybe we will. Well, we already did. Anyway, thank you. Oh, Mike Corbyn was a typo. Okay. So you had dinner with Corbyn. Yeah. Well, I will not have dinner with Corbyn. Although who knows, what kind of dinners we're going to have anyway. It might not be a regular occurrence. I'm exaggerating, but yeah, things are economically going to get worse. By the way, yeah, it's good to remember as bad a day this is and as bad the future looks that uh again it could be worse. If you look at the Labour Party historically, it could be worse. One of the things, actually, I was going to say this in the context of Brexit. We're out of time, but I'll say it quickly, is that the main union, I was talking about the unions controlling the Labour Party. The main union, Unite, was very openly campaigned for Brexit, and that's going to make it difficult not just to try to come back to the European Union, but to open up the single market and to allow the free movement of people. The reason Unite doesn't want the free movement of people because they want their their people, their members to be able to do, as crappy a job as they want, while demanding higher pay and less hours and not having competition from elsewhere. So yeah, that's always important to remember. Prime ministers can make speeches, but they are not dictators, which is a good thing, but not a good thing when you it's, what's not a good thing is who actually does control them in to a large extent. All right. Speaking of prime ministers, we'll be speaking of many prime ministers when we talk about the Conservative Party that is no longer in power. On the reality show that follows in a minute. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Morgan. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Bye bye.